we've got a good group here. I think we have a majority. So the first item on our agenda is to approve. Okay, is to approve the minutes for August 18th, 2022 and September 22nd, 2022. Is there anyone who can make that motion for us?
Hello, so moved.
Great. Is there any discussion of that motion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, those minutes are approved. We'll go to our discussion items then. The first item on the agenda is the sheriff node legislation, and we'll turn time over to Aaron Tilton. Is he online? Oh, there you are. See, is that yours? Did your green?
Looks like it's on.
Okay,
Cool.
we'll start with you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's, I did get the emails from several that wanted to get on the little working group that we have. And I, you know, some level, I'm going to be punting a little bit back to Senator Collimore. I know that the language for the bill is kind of being written or drafted as we speak. I think there is a introductory document. I don't know if that's been circulated. Oh, okay. Well, it does exist, but whether or not we can circulate it is in question. So we'll see. The topic for just the discussion today was how it would compare to current online dispute resolution tools that exist. So similar things are being done now in the form of another protocol called Claros. I don't know if you guys have heard that before, but you can look that up. And it's a little different than what the sheriff node would be doing, but basically it's a decentralized dispute resolution structure with jurors that are stake tokens, and then they hear disputes from two parties who agree to have their dispute arbitrated by that protocol. And they'll take things that are either on-chain or off-chain. And the most recent kind of recognition that they got was from the Mexican government over some real estate. And so they granted them the status of, I guess for lack of a better word, it wasn't officially recognized as part of the process for the government for adjudicating that process, but they granted them recognition that the arbitration that they concluded was determinative. And so that structure flew in Mexico, right? So there's an example there. There are a couple other examples in this document. But so the idea was, suffice it to say that this is coming, it's being done. And what we would want to do here in the state of Utah is structure some things that enabled the scope to be more beneficial to the users. And one way that would take place, for example, the limitation of this Claros protocol is that it is not a base layer protocol in any blockchain. It's a, several layers or an aggregation layer on top of the base protocol. So here in the state, it has a scenario where anybody can be a juror. So you don't know if there's a bad actor in there, or there might be some other scenario. You don't know what the quality is of the adjudication that you're going to get. So in the sheriff node, it envisions a couple of options, and we can take all, some, none, whatever, the body decides, the legislature and the governor decide is the best appropriate path to take. But it would be a combination of having nodes and having a requirement for that node. Say you were an attorney or an arbitrator already, right? You had some experience in that process, or a subject matter expert or whatever, but people submit their evidence or their documents or whatever to the protocol. The protocol reviews that, comes up with a decision, and then the weight of that decision is given to the state to recognize it and then adjudicate that. One of the limitations of the Claros protocol is that if there is fraud or theft, they have no jurisdiction to do anything about it, right? And that is one of the single most difficult things right now with cryptocurrencies is fraud or theft. And so under this structure, you would have, if it was part of a base layer protocol, along with a centralized structure for KYC, where you had people actually had to prove who they were, get onto the protocol, onto the network, then use that, and agree to, in the terms of use, that the arbitration of the sheriff node would be binding on all transactions, and that if it was recognized that there was theft, fraud, or there was an error in some transaction, you would submit your assets to the final disposition of the arbitration. And then somebody like the Attorney General or the administrative body of the state, maybe the Department of Commerce, could then basically recognize that, and then the Attorney General will carry that out. If there was fraud or theft, there could be an investigation. So it would do a couple of things, one of which would deter bad actors. If you knew that you had to KYC and then your assets were subject to this arbitration that was controlled by nodes of people who are actual, legal experts or had a subject matter expert under that structure, you'd probably go look for an easier target, right? I mean, that would be the basic thing. So it would deter bad actors. But then also the structure of this would allow organizations or entities like the DAOs, where a corporation thought, hey, maybe I'd like to be a DAO, but I don't have any legal jurisdiction that would allow me to recover assets in a dispute or something like that. You could combine that with the use of the DAO. They could convert that, and now they would have a place of redress that would have legal binding weight in the state of Utah. So there are a lot of benefits to it, but there's also checks and balances. One, you don't have to use this blockchain if you don't want to. It's totally voluntary, right? Two, the structure behind this recognition, official recognition from the state allows other products to be created like insurance, right? So it's an environment or an ecosystem where other groups can get on, and now that they know there's a way to basically structure assets or recover assets, people are willing to take more risk and create new products on a decentralized basis, right? And then open up new DAOs for that structure. And so it creates a lot of advantages that are recognizable in today's economy, but then they are transferred to a digital network. So with that, I'll probably stop and maybe leave it open for questions, or Senator Colm or.
Yeah, so I found the document. I apologize. I just got it shortly, but so I just emailed it out to the group, and as soon as I'm able to get it to Chad, then we'll have it up on the screen too. But really, I think the key is, one, as we continue to emphasize, that this is only applicable to blockchains that have this type of arbitration or contemplates this type of sheriff node in their smart contract. And then two, all we're doing is one of two things. One, either you can directly submit the dispute to an agency, contemplating an agency or division within the Department of Commerce, who would investigate or be the arbitrator of quasi litigation or whatever. And then once they issue that order, the order would be executed potentially by the AG's office. So that's one mechanism. The second mechanism is in the smart contract, you can recognize one of these online dispute resolutions, which I think are going to become more and more commonplace, even in just our day-to-day transactions. We already recognize the American, what's it called? The American Arbitration Association, AAA. Okay.
Not as easily recognizable, but.
Yes. Anyways, the court's already recognized decisions from that. And I think we're going to see more and more that just day-to-day contracts are going to have these types of dispute resolutions available. And so all we're saying is we're kind of jumping the gun and not forcing the courts to recognize it yet, but forcing this division where you would otherwise bring a blockchain dispute to recognize whatever dispute resolution is within the smart contract. They would recognize that and then issue the order pursuant to whatever the resolution is.
Might add one more comment, that I think that having that ability actually lowers the cost for both the user and the state, because if we just leave it up to kind of the Wild West without anything defined, and all of a sudden these disputes start coming and they have no way to categorize it, and that's what's happening now in a lot of jurisdictions. They just kind of throw up their hands and go, don't know, right? And they're forced to kind of fumble their way through it. The courts don't know what to do, those kind of things. So if we create the structure and very narrowly define it, practice it, figure it out, kind of iterate it as we go. I think that'll be helpful, long-term for the state, and be able to kind of crawl before we walk before we run kind of thing in this structure.
Thank you for the presentation. Any questions or comments from the committee? Dave, do you have something? Did you press your? So I know which one you are. I think, let's see, did it go green?
Really quick, the document that's on the screen right
Awesome.
now should be in your email boxes too.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, so the question that I have, is this just specific to a specific blockchain, or is this something that would be also potentially used for DAOs that perhaps have assets that could be, I guess, brought back into the fold, so to speak, if they disappear? So for example, if I were to create an NFT smart contract that was, say, governed by a DAO with some more centralized control, but you were able to like reclaim those assets, some sort of like treasury note or something like that that's serialized, you could do that on any chain. And so my question is this something that would be extendable to smart contracts on existing chains, or is this only specifically designed for this sheriff node chain?
I think as Senator Cullimore intimated there, that you could do either or, that you could have a alternate dispute resolution. So it's not inculcating, a single actor as the end all be all, right? Everybody would have to use that chain, but it is one example. And anybody that spun up a chain and would go through some kind of administrative process could then have a node at the state level to take care of those. Or in the case of Claros or others, that they had off-chain dispute resolution that was decentralized through, a series of nodes, and two parties agreed to that arbitration beforehand, you could do it there as well. So I think it's designed to be flexible so that there's not, kind of a one-size-fits-all scenario, because that's really not the way that transactions are today, right? There's multiple iterations.
Right. And with also too, even some centralized entities that interact with blockchain, such as centralized exchanges. And there's always these concerns as well about whether or not someone who is potentially a bad actor or involved in a hack or exploit of some sort, money goes into a centralized exchange. And the question is it the exchanges that go through this whole process to get these funds back? Or is there some, is this something that could be extendable as well to centralized exchanges in order to stop fraud and reclaim funds?
Potentially, but there's a precursor condition that has to exist in your example, which is in the case of a hack, it really depends on what blockchain that took place. Where's the asset? Is that Bitcoin? Was that Ethereum? Was that something, whatever that was? There's no native protocol for that there now, right? So you can't force somebody from those blockchains. They're still open to that fraud or that theft that exists today, because the condition for a third-party dispute to be settled by arbitration is that both parties agree to it. So if you're hacking a protocol, you're probably not agreeing to arbitration beforehand, right?
Sure.
So that's kind of that difference. That's where having both, right? One that's off-chain or some kind of predetermined settlement agreement through a smart contract off-chain, but then having something else that is on-chain, like the sheriff node interacts at the base layer, right? At the lower level protocol levels, and is part of every user's terms of use agreement. They agreed to that so that they know, hey, I'm going to get on this chain. And there are people that have the ability to dispute my transactions. So the immutability of it is essentially gone, right? So in one way, the immutability of a blockchain is awesome because it allows you to kind of transact anywhere in the world, but it's also terrible when you're trying to figure out, hey, something was stolen, something was lost, or there was fraud committed or something like that. It forever makes that immutability, certainty. So that's the difference. And people have to weigh what their choice is. Do I want immutability over, redress?
Well, and then the third option that I'm suggesting, or perhaps, maybe has or hasn't been entertained, is that you still maintain immutability, but you still have certain types of asset classes that you can launch on any chain that are governed by a smart contract that do have reclaimability, and
Yeah,
then have that governed by.
And those are the innovations that this bill would allow to take place because of the flexibility.
Okay.
It was just somebody would have to design it, go to the state and say, hey, here's how this works, here's our node.
Okay.
Kind of thing.
Okay, let's go to Randy.
So my question may have just been answered by that colloquy, but when you first described it, I wasn't sure whether this was entirely elective. But the concept is that this is legislation that would apply currently to the whole ecosystem. Some aspects of it couldn't apply unless there had been elections. So for example, arbitration depends upon the participants in a particular chain having elected to be subject to arbitration. But in the absence of that, the law would pass and there would be a resolution mechanism that now applied to every every activity in the state of Utah. Is that what you're
Not necessarily,
contemplating?
no. Go ahead.
Well, and maybe I'm understanding what we're trying to accomplish wrong here, but I think this is wholly perspective. Like
Okay.
the blockchain would have to contemplate either some third-party dispute resolution that could be enforced by the state of Utah, or it would contemplate that the dispute would be resolved by the agency within the state of Utah with the ability to use a sheriff node.
So the law would create a framework in which new activities could elect to be subject to it, and they would have the option of either of those choices. But I thought that was a little different than what the colloquy we've just been having.
It's an enabling structure that allows technologies to be innovated around the law. And so
Okay.
it doesn't apply to any predated technology unless they themselves, the programmers decided to adopt it and then adapt it.
Go ahead.
Just to make sure I understand, like, I think I get it. I think I like what I'm hearing. So today, if I wanted to create an on-chain title company, right, for whether it's real property or for automobiles, right, with the idea of being that I want to do peer-to-peer sales of my car and prove that this piece of paper is actually the authentic title. If I do that on chain, that'd be great. It's immutable. I can verify like that NFT that is now the title. It works. However, I don't have the thing that would block that, I think, from really flourishing is that I wouldn't want to put my car on chain, knowing if someone stole my private key or hacked my account, that suddenly I just lost the title to my car forever.
Yep.
And so if I'm understanding correctly, correct me if I'm wrong or qualify or whatever, if we pass this here, then someone can go and innovate and say, hey, all titles now are on chain. We completely remove. Then it opens the door then essentially to say, we don't need title insurance essentially. Like we can prove, and if there were, someone hacked my account, oh my gosh, I just realized I lost my title today. I could go back onto, or I could basically take advantage of this and go through the course of this juror system and then essentially reclaim my NFT back into presumably into a different wallet that hasn't been hacked.
And there may be iterations around that where, let's say the title insurance industry set up their own arbitrating body, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that they would be the first line of kind of appeal, right? That you'll go to and say, hey, we got this, and you would submit your evidence to them. They would go through and adjudicate it and go through this process. And once they came up with the decision based on their subject matter experts, then they would send that decision to the state. The state would ratify that or recognize it. And then the attorney general or whoever needed, if there was law enforcement needed, because there was theft or fraud, but if it was just an error, whatever, they would take the appropriate step to then distribute the property back to the rightful owner.
Cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dave.
So I guess just my question to that, because you mentioned the car title example, right? So the smart contract that governs an NFT for something like a car title is something that you can have some relative centralized control through, perhaps like a DAO controls a lot of that ownership. And so it can yoink, for lack of a better word, and reclaim that title and distribute it centrally, based off of the mechanisms of the DAO. And so that's just why, just for the sake of the argument, I'm asking, does this have to be something that needs to happen on a protocol level, or is this something that can happen on an asset level individually, smart contract by smart contract? Because then you go without the limitations of it being on a specific chain. And so if there's some sort of arbitration process, right, wouldn't it make sense that you say that anyone that has a DAO that's able to do some sort of reclamation or investigation process, they can go through this, adjudication, how do you say it? Sorry, my process. And that would be more flexible, in my opinion, because, you have these really well-established chains, Avalanche, Ethereum, Solana, so on and so forth, that people don't want to necessarily move off. So in terms of adoption, that's the big concern that I have. Do people really want to go onto a chain where on the protocol level, transactions can be reversed and you lose that immutability, but instead perhaps as like an additional thing, if people still want to participate in a process like this, but don't want to jump in feet first into a completely new chain, you still could have a process where you could have that reclamation and adjudication process.
You could do both. And in fact, you could have a DAO that was an arbitrating body,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
you could do both, but they're also, the issue with that is that without being on chain, the parties have to agree beforehand, right, to this dispute resolution. That does not solve certain instances of theft or fraud, right? So with it being a blockchain that has that as part of its native protocols, right, which is a different, again, a different product. Think of it this way, it's just one more choice of a product for a customer. And so if I had the choice of whether to use a blockchain that had these protections or not, for me, is maybe if I was a first-time user or don't really know anything about it or whatever was going on, I might want to use that. Or if I was an insurance company, or if I was somebody that needed this type of redress and surety around that in order to insure something, so they had an assurance of recoverability of an asset, that has to be done at the protocol layer, because by using that network, it subjects all transactions, not just the ones that are agreed to beforehand to enter into arbitration. It is a initial fundamental premise of arbitration, and the immutability of that blockchain is gone, but the decentralized nature of its nodes stays intact. So it's just a different structure that like for example, it's estimated 20% of all Bitcoin is locked in wallets that nobody has the private keys to. Right? You're never getting that back. It's just gone, vaporized, right? But if they had a sheriff node arbitration process in the protocol, in the UTXO protocol, or in, like for Ethereum, it's in the accounting protocol that they'd have, the transaction protocol that allowed something to either be moved to a new wallet, or the control of the keys, or replicate a new key, or move, some kind of process, then you could right those wrongs, right? We're just errors, it's just user error. But Bitcoin and virtually all immutable blockchains require perfection of users, which we know does not exist. And this makes it so that inexperienced users or whoever, for whatever reason, can have the assurance that their assets are not going to basically be locked without their ability to recover.
Right. And I think also, and the idea that if I were to go on this chain, some of the things that I would be concerned about, and I'm sure some of the people in my circles as well, would be if you have you lose the immutability, where if there's like fraud or cases where things are stolen or whatever, there's also the possibility that something could be wrongly taken from you. And so I think that this is something that I think would just be a big concern and hurdle to overcome.
But you get the choice. You don't have to use it.
Yeah, no,
And-
I see that.
And the other part is, let's say, for example, we don't like what's happening at the state level, right? I got into government because I was suspicious of it, right?
Right.
And so, as an elected official, I was like, okay, let's see what's going on here. And if we don't like how the government is working or doing something, that chain, that technology still has the ability then to say, okay, maybe we don't want the state of Utah to have this node. Let's cancel their node, because the state has no right to it, right? Cancel their node and we'll give it to somebody else who is adjudicating this the way that the users want. Right? It's kind of like the same concept that, the state's rights, you can vote with your feet. If you don't like what's going on in California, go to Utah.
All right. Any other questions? If you're online too, if you raise your hand, I'll make sure to call on you. All right. I don't see anything else. Anything you want to add, Aaron?
No.
Okay. I think that was a good discussion. Looking forward to see what you guys come back with. Let's move to the second item on the agenda, which is the digital seals and soul-bound NFT legislation. Representative Jefferson Moss is online and has a quick update on that.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. So this bill was actually introduced last session, but we didn't get it drafted till the very end. But and I've got Amelia here as well to help, since she helped drive the drafting of this. But the concept basically is just that we want to create a way for local governments, is what we've got drafted currently in the bill. And this was actually sent out to everybody last time. So maybe we can send it out again if you don't have it. But creating a way to do NFTs for local records. So marriage licenses is one that we can speak to, but there's a number of others that we'd like to look at. So that's kind of the high level on it. Amelia, did you want to give a little more context on kind of the basis and what you're hoping to do with that?
Yeah, so the legislation is written in a way that it can be expandable for other things, but most particularly basically looking at government documents. A lot of our documents are paper documents that are then just kept in government databases, right? Every identity document that you own, pretty much that you utilize, was created by the government. Your birth certificate was the county health department. A marriage certificate is county health department. Your driver's license was the DMV. Your passport was the State Department. So all of those documents, one of the issues that we have is that, like in today's world, so much of our transactions are done digitally, but we have to have a way to verify that these are original documents. So right now we get like pretty paper with like pretty ink, and we put a nice seal on them and we call that an official government document. But when you go to a bank, for example, and you give them a copy of a marriage certificate so that you can change your name, they don't actually have a way to verify that that's an actual marriage certificate. And so what this would do is it would create that seal that you get, that pretty paper, but it would do a way to register that on a hash on the blockchain. So we're not putting anyone's personal information on the blockchain. What this does is it allows us to take documents digitally, and it's a way to create a seal for those documents to show that actually is an original document. And then even one step further, you have the ability to see who registered that hash. So for example, with our marriage licenses, the way we do it is we take basically a PDF of the paper we send you, and then we attach that with a second document that gives you the ability to scan that document and say, yes, this is the original. None of the names were changed on it. None of the dates were changed on it. This is the original document. Nothing was changed. And then you can go one step further to say, and this document, the hash of it was registered by Utah County, the government of Utah County. So it basically is giving us a way to create that seal and put that in a blockchain. And then that gives individuals the ability to have access to their identity documents if they, for example, lose the key to their fire safe without having to go back and ask the government for permission. So I'll give you an example of how this has been used in real life. I received a Facebook message from a citizen in my county at 10:45 p.m. on a Friday night. And she said, hey, I was married during COVID. None of my family was able to come to the wedding because it was during COVID. My husband and I are getting sealed tomorrow morning in the temple at 8 a.m. Our 10 siblings have flown into Utah from all over the country. The temple said we have to have our marriage certificate in order for them to perform the sealing ceremony. We have moved twice since we got married in the last year because we're college students. We just opened our fire safe and our marriage certificate isn't in there. Is there any way you can get us an official marriage certificate before tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. so that my family is not sorely disappointed when we show up at the temple? And I said, go to the email that you use to get your marriage license, search the word marriage certificate, and your digital marriage certificate will pop up. This is fully verifiable, just as immutable. It's actually harder to forge this than it would be a paper copy. She brought that to the temple with her phone, opened up her phone, showed it to the folks at the temple because they're familiar with our marriage license system. They knew what it was. They went through, performed their ceremony. Happy citizen who didn't have to wait, 2.5 weeks for a paper copy. Right. So it doesn't compromise any of their information. Now, the thing is, the reason why we want this to codify this is because places that are used to it will accept this. But if they're not used to it, they think they can't. So this wouldn't be requiring anyone to do this, but this would basically be saying that a local government has the option to choose to create certified digital documents. And then that's a way to utilize, so it's a convenience for citizens so that they don't have to, if they lose a paper copy, they don't have to go back and ask the government permission to get their own birth certificate because they've got a digital copy that they can utilize. And so really all this legislation does is say that government entities, whether counties, cities, or the state, has the ability to certify a digital document. That's pretty much all it does, is it gives, whichever document creates that. So a marriage certificate is done at the county level, a birth certificate is done at the health department level, which in my county is a county, but in other counties, sometimes it's multiple counties. A car title is done at the state level. And then, a business license, for example, is often done at the city level. Whichever entity is creating that official government document, it gives them the ability to create an official digital document as well. That's the purpose of this.
All right, thank
And
you.
I'll just
Go
add,
ahead.
oh, sorry, Jordan, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Representative Moss.
Oh, I was just going to say, so at this point, the legislation is really giving local governments. We don't currently have it set for the state. We thought that might be a good way to enter in. And then it also puts into the legislation very clear guidelines around how that information would be protected. That would all need to be provided for that to be able to go into effect.
Right. And for the working group, we want to bring the state's personal information security officer to make sure that we want to make sure that any time that this digital information is being done, it's done in a way that will protect people's personal privacy. So basically we want to have the personal privacy folks, CIO for the state, make sure that all things are done in compliance with cybersecurity standards, those sorts of things.
Great. Let's go to discussion from the committee. Randy.
So you noted, it all sounds terrific. You noted that one of the big issues, though, is that for people who aren't familiar with it, they don't know that they are even allowed to accept it, even though, that was a clearly acceptable marriage license.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something in the bill that sort of says this must be acceptable? Is it a matter of, will there be public education efforts? I mean, what's the next step to say, once it's allowed that every sort of local government unit can do this, how do you make sure that you don't show up and present it and they say, what's this? It looks like a tin sheriff badge.
Right. Well, we've had that issue now. So here's the issue. There's actually nothing preventing us from doing this today, right? I did this with myself. I used my marriage certificate as the very first one. And I walked into my bank to change my name and they said, I'm sorry, I need the official marriage certificate. And I was like, yeah, that's the official one. And they said, no, like the one the county gave you. I said, yeah, this is the one the county gave me. They're like, no, like the original document. I said, yeah, this is the original document. And they said, well, we don't know how to accept this. And I said, well, call your manager and we'll explain to your manager that we have digital certificates now. So they called the manager and I explained to the manager we have digital certificates. And they said, well, how do I verify this? And I said, you call the county clerk. And they said, okay, well, we're going to call the county clerk. And I said, okay, look up the county clerk's phone number. And they looked it up and they said, okay. And I said, now before you dial the phone, I want you to look at the name on the county clerk. And they said, Amelia Powers Gardner. And I said, now look at my name. They said, Amelia Powers Gardner. And I said, you can call me all you want, but that's my marriage certificate.
Did it work?
Yeah, they changed the name. So, but there's going to be a learning curve with this. But here's how it happens. What's going to happen in the future? We don't necessarily have to tell everybody that they have to. But what's going to happen is when I'm not the one whose marriage certificate it is. For example, the DMV in Provo doesn't have a problem with this right now, but the DMV in Fairfield does. Right. So when the DMV in Fairfield has a problem with that and they call the Utah County office, that gives our Utah County office the ability to say her code, 20A-17-143, this is where that is legal. And then they go, okay, so it's still not going to fix the problem overnight, but also this isn't an issue that needs to be fixed overnight. We just need to start allowing people to have this opportunity, and then it'll go through. If it becomes a major problem, then I'm sure we could ask for some education money next session. But this session, I think it's just giving the people the ability, so when they get the phone call, they can say, what gives you the right to do that? I really don't want to have to, like, when I get a call from the DMV in Fairfield, I really hate to have to say, all right, under the United States Constitution, every power not expressly given to the federal government is to the state government. And in the state of Utah, marriage licenses are given to the counties and it's dictated to the county clerk. Like, you don't have to have that conversation, right? Because we can make that argument now, and we have, but it's just a lot easier to just say, hey, you know what, this is allowed. Now, that is allowed for marriage certificates, but in other areas, if other people want to adopt this, it just makes it a lot easier for them.
Sorry, just real quick. Matt just added a comment on the chat, what I think is a good idea. And I would actually love to see, rather than just turning to the state, it'd be great if we had maybe the blockchain coalition or some of those groups come together and put some information that could be very easily accessible that we could push out. I don't think it would take a lot of money to do that, but it might be good to have an industry backing on it.
Okay, that's a great idea to have maybe an industry do the PSA.
Mhm.
That's a great idea.
Any other questions or comments?
Fine.
Sorry. Let's see, Ian, can you unmute yourself?
Yep, I just wanted to say, I really think this is one of the cooler, maybe the most compelling non-financial use case I've seen. And Commissioner Gardner, actually, I was going to ask, could you tell maybe the elevator pitch 30-second summary of the story that you shared with me when you were in Washington? Because I have been singing that from the rooftops about the marriage license and Ukraine and all that. Just because I think that's really one of the most compelling things I've ever heard, and why this specific bill is so important.
Yeah, so one of the things that it does, if you look, we have the ability to help folks worldwide that don't have maybe the same structure we do. So for example, you have a country like Ukraine where you have people that have they have gone all over, right? Overnight, bombs are falling on them. They get on the nearest train, they get out of Dodge, they end up in like a refugee camp. Most of those people didn't have time to stop by the bank to go to their safe deposit box to get their marriage certificate, their birth certificate, their passport, their whatever. And then here they are stuck at the border in Poland and they're in a refugee camp. If Ukraine then has the ability to take that person's identity documents and give them digital copies that are verified, and that the UN, for example, could, so I actually met with the CIO of the UN to talk about this, and he said, could you do this, instead of creating it anew, could you do this with past existing documents? And I showed him my marriage license. I said, yeah, actually that's what we did with mine, right? Because then what happens is these people have the ability, they fled the country, even here in Utah, we want to accept refugees, but we have an obligation to our citizens to prove that these refugees coming in are going to be safe people. So we need to know what their identity is. Ukraine could then theoretically take the birth certificate, the marriage certificate, the passport information for these people, and they could create a digital document and they could do that. The problem is when you take a country that's in crisis, they don't really have the ability to prove the technology while they're in the middle of a crisis. But if we in Utah have proven this technology, that not only can you verify that this is an actual original document, but that it was minted by the government of Utah, then what happens in the future is we have the ability to help other places say, we've proven this technology, we know it works. So when something like this happens, we could go back and ask the government of Ukraine, hey, we've got like 7 of your refugees that we'd like to bring in, but we need to verify that their documents are valid, or they don't have any paper documents. Instead of having to like go through and make a bunch of paper documents, can you just pull up and digitize those and then give them the ability to show us that that's an original document, right? So long term, this gives us the ability to really take the technology and prove it out for future use for the rest of the world.
That's a really compelling case. And I'll just say, for Ukraine specifically, before everything, I was trying to get a visa for some of my family members to just come and visit, for a few months. And they would go to the embassy, the US embassy, and they would get denied. every time. We'd have to pay $200. They'd get all their documents together, show that they're, they promised to come back to the country, and they just no reason, nothing. They just get denied. So I went out there and I talked to some of the members of the embassy to say, like, how do you determine this? Like, what's a better way to help them validate that they're good people? And they said, we don't trust any of the documents coming in at all. They could have the official stamp, seal, whatever it is, people forge it. And so even if they have the real stuff, we won't look at it. And so if there was a way like this that they actually could authenticate it in real time, it could solve a lot of problems beyond those that you talked about.
Right, and they would be able to see that the person who minted that document is an official of the government of Ukraine.
Exactly.
Right. It's actually harder to forge these documents than it is the birth certificates that we're trusting today.
Great. Trace.
Chuck. I don't remember reading in the bill whether there was, with the actual implementation of like which chain it would get anchored into. Because one of the issues, for example, Ethereum just switched from proof of work to proof of stake.
Mhm.
Well, that throws us back into the same situation of like having like a trusted authority that we have to rely on in order to authenticate. Whereas like there's a project proof of existence where you take like a PDF file, you turn it into a SHA-256 hash anchored into the Bitcoin blockchain, and then it's mathematically provable, and then also has the proof of work behind it. So that way, even if the stakers were to go and reorganize the blockchain
Mhm.
or try to, engage in something to either attempt to revoke that this thing was ever certified to begin with, or tried to alter it or something, at least with like a proof of work blockchain, that type of activity isn't able to be done like after the fact.
Right.
And that's where a lot of the fraud also takes place is, people go and try to change the records that already existed. And so with a proof of work blockchain, you don't really have that type of an issue. So I was wondering if the bill contemplates the type of blockchain to use, and then the security of that blockchain based on how much work is actually piled up on it.
So not at this time, and I'll explain why. Like I can see where you're going with that, and I think if we get further down the road with this, that may be a modification that we want. At this time, we don't specify the type of blockchain, and I don't think we need to, because what we're looking at is we're looking at comparing a new thing to the existing thing, right? And right now, the new thing, i.e., putting it even on Ethereum with a proof of stake versus proof of work, is still superior to than a piece of paper that can be printed with paper that you ordered on Amazon. So it's still an improvement from where we are today, but what you're looking at is absolutely like an even further improvement. And I think as the technology becomes more available, I think that's a great direction to go in, but I could see that as like an update to this in a year or two. I think at first we get the concept patterned down, because you're also going to have some areas of government that want to use a permissioned blockchain rather than a public blockchain. And frankly, that's still superior to the paper that we have today. Is it completely immutable for the future? No. I mean, would it, for example, if we were in China and we were doing this in China and it was a complete blockchain controlled by China, then obviously they would have the ability to erase those things from the blockchain because they would have control of more than 51% of the nodes. But at this time, it's still superior to what we have today. And I think that this bill is sufficient to at least get that out into the marketplace.
And I would like to add that just the way that public-private keys work in terms of digital signatures is it doesn't really matter where it's stored at and how secure that is. I literally could print out a piece of paper that has a digital signature that was generated by a private key that I don't have access to, but that public signature, I can verify that it was actually generated from that private key, which originated from the government, sort of like PGP, public-private keys. And I could present this and say, here's my document. I literally just drew it in crayon, but here's the signature. And that basically proves that the government or whatever certifying, signed that document and said it was authentic.
Yeah, but to get that, what happens when the stakers change? Like now we have Russians that are the stakers instead of Ukrainians, and they're just going to reorg all those digital documents, right? Like if we have an immutable blockchain that we can use right now, or at least one that's based on proof of work, like why wouldn't we do that?
Right. Well, so I was gonna say, in that, there's nothing stopping us from telling a local government or a state government or whatever entity is going to be doing this. There's nothing from us telling them that that's not a superior method to do it. But as of right now, I think just getting it into law that this is a possibility that they can do it is really this first step. So I think that I'm not opposed to what you're saying. I'm just saying for the first iteration, I think it's more just saying, hey, this is allowed.
And
Because
can I
I'm
just
just trying to-
Oh, sorry, Trace, go ahead.
Well,
Oh.
let me just ask the question. So are you saying that it's really incumbent upon whatever government agency, the county or whoever's issuing it, to figure out what the right level of security is?
Right, because the use cases are all going to be different. And that's actually what we do today, right? Today, we're not looking at just marriage licenses. We're not just looking at identity documents. We might be looking at car titles, and we may need to have a different level of security for each purpose. And some of them, there may be uses that they have to be permissioned, and the only way that you would have access to see it is if with a grammar request, for example. But we don't know what those use cases are, and so I don't want to pigeonhole it at this time. I just want to basically say that this is allowed. But then, for example, in a year or two, we could run one that says when you're using identity documents that deal with people's individual information, then it's required that they do that.
Jordan, I was just going to add, that actually is the reason we're excited to bring this to this group, is this was a first draft that we put together at the very end of last session. This was one of those case studies when we were first talking about this group, is this would be a good one to have vetted. So we're open. I think Amelia Commissioner Gardner would speak to this as well. I think we would love more input and feedback. We've got a lot of information around how that in terms of the security, they have to go through a fairly rigorous process of defining all of these things, but we would love any input. If anybody wants to be part of this working group, we'd love to hone it down a little bit more before the session.
And I do like your suggestion, particularly for identity documents, maybe in the future, having it like a higher standard for those identity documents, as opposed to an internal government document.
Yeah, I suppose part of the issue I'm raising though is why not just use a database? Like if we're using proof of stake or we're locating everything into essentially a database, like what do we need to include a blockchain
Because
for
it
at
would still
all?
need to be a distributed ledger, because if it's in a central database, you still have to ask for a copy of that. Like right now, we do not have a way to digitally seal documents. And so they are in a database. But if you want to be able to have a digital document, that you need someone else to be able to verify that that came from the county, unless we as a state are going to have a master data center that we store all that information in, that has a portal. Like we would literally have to create a portal for people to be able to verify that information with the state. The cost of doing that is significantly higher. And I think that's a higher lift than just saying, let's use a blockchain hash with a distributed ledger.
Hmm.
So what you're saying could work, but we don't have the infrastructure to have that.
Yeah, maybe it's for the working group.
Yeah.
Like-
I think
like-
it's a great conversation for the working group.
Yeah,
though.
because I mean, I'm hitting more at like the actual authenticity of the document and how we verify that. And if we're verifying it through proof of stake, like that can just be arbitrarily changed by whoever the stakers are. Whereas it's a philosophical difference. If it's proof of work, then you have to actually do all of that work and have a larger cumulative proof of work chain in order to, so where are we anchoring the trust
But we don't
into?
always need to necessarily verify that. Like I said,
Right,
if it's
so
an
there's-
internal government document that we're just utilizing a digital document that's emailed to one another, as opposed to an
Mhm.
identity document to an outside source, it's very different levels.
Right.
Well, I think Representative Moss, do you have anything you wanted to sum on that?
No, I just appreciate the feedback and would love, if anybody would like to join. We hadn't had a chance the last time to get a group together, but we'd love to get anybody that's interested to help us refine this down and take a look at the bill. Like I said, we sent it out before, but if we need to, we can send it back out.
Awesome. Thanks for the discussion, Trace. I think it'd be great if you could join that and kind of help give some direction there.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to the third discussion item we have on crypto-centric amendment for sandbox legislation, and that's Matt Pohl.
Hey guys, thank you. Yeah, first up, we did have a working group earlier this week. I just wanted to thank Jason Sterzer, who's here. I believe he works for the Utah Security or Department of Security. I always get it mixed up with is it the SEC or Utah SEC, right? Maybe Jason, you can help me with that.
Yeah, with the Utah Division of Securities.
Yeah, thank you. It's always a tongue twister for me. And then also David Wiley, who was there with us. So we met with, really quickly, Go Ed Utah, or Utah, what's the new word they're using now? It's not Go Ed, it's Utah Op or something.
Go Utah.
Go Utah, thank you. So we met with Go Utah. We kind of hit a wall in regards to whether or not there was an expansion of the existing sandbox legislation. And I'm not saying that there isn't. I'm not saying that there something may not present itself, but the current discussion kind of went into a corner, and it was led by the very few crypto participants who have applied for sandbox. And David actually had some really great feedback, and he provided a document which is called the FinCEN guidance document, which I had read a long time ago, but I got familiarized with it. And we recognized a area in Utah that we could make some amendments to the existing Money Transmitter Act that got set up in 2015. So I think we're complete on the sandbox legislation. Let me propose what I am seeing we could do with the Money Transmitter Act. So FinCEN put out some guidelines, and David was kind enough to kind of point out where to look, so he shortcutted a lot of my reading here. But if you go to page 22 on FinCEN, I don't know if there's any way that someone could bring up a digital copy of this. I don't know if David is on and able to share that. But anyways, as a reference point, if you go to page 21, 22, it actually goes through the recommended exemptions for to be a money transmitter. And if you go into the Money Transmitter Act on the second page in 725-202, you'll notice that there's only 3 bullet points that allow you to be exempt. And it's pretty much, you're the US, you're the department or an agency of the US, you're a state or political subdivision of the state, or you're a depository institution or a trust company. And that's it. And if you look at all of the exemption options that exist in FinCEN, there's much broader options for exemption. So here's what we hit, is we have people playing in the crypto industry that are clearly exempt by the state, but then they go out to their customer and they say, hey, look, we don't need to do this. We're exempt. We've applied for the money transmitter exemption. We've gotten it from the other states. Or maybe there's some other form that's not called the money transmitter for other states. And we have those, but there's actually a certifiable exemption that's provided by the department. Where here, what we have is you're just exempt, and then whoever the user is that's interacting with said, protocol, or it could be a DAO, it could be another company that's using some Web3 technology, and they're going, well, we don't trust you. We don't trust you. Oh, thank you. We don't trust you because we don't believe that you have an exemption, and therefore, we're not going to do business for you. So we have agreed, and I'm open to feedback. We have agreed that there is a disconnect here that we could easily solve. We could provide an amendment to the existing Money Transmitter Act, and we could also provide an opt-in, not a requirement, but an opt-in where people could say, I'm exempt and I'm putting my name in with the department to file for an actual exemption. So whether, on a federal level, if my dealings with the CFTC, you actually file an exemption, and then there's a place on the website that shows all the list of people who have filed for exemptions and are approved as a filed exemption. And it shows all the people who are actually certified, right? They have their Series 3, they're registered as a hedge fund, and so on. And so I think it's a service that we could provide the industries that are in Utah that are doing this, but also the participants that want to move here. And they're going, oh, this is great. This is just an extra thing Utah is doing to provide me as a blockchain participant some type of certification that says, hey, we're not out there to screw people. We're actually doing as much as we can to be on the up and up. And we actually we applied for this exemption. So I'm proposing we take this a completely different direction, that we take the working group down this direction, unless there's something I'm missing in regards to the existing sandbox legislation that we think could expand it. We just hit a wall because it ends up going to the Division of Finance either way, and all of the examples and working cases we could come up with. And so we think that this is probably the greatest thing that we could do from the discovery process that we went through this week.
Thanks, Matt. Discussion.
Maybe I'll start off. Dave Lemke here. So our company, Giddy, we're a non-custodial wallet. And like for us to advertise with Facebook, Google, things, they say, hey, you need to have a money transmitter license and be registered with FinCEN. So for FinCEN, that's easy. You hop on their website and register as a money services business. The application is fairly seamless and takes about a month. Money transmission, I've tried to apply for both the license. Our company has the surety bonds, the audited financial statements. We've met just about all the qualifications we could and got rejected from that and from the sandbox because it's like, well, you're not custodying funds. And like crypto to crypto transfers, even though economically it's identical to what Venmo does with fiat currency, since you're not fiat, it's not the DFI's jurisdiction. Therefore, we're not going to issue you an MTL. And so as a result, we're going to other states that will issue us an MTL. And just to get it there because we need it just to advertise, period. And so this whole idea of like, if we had something where we could say, look, we got rejected by the state, like that you can't take that to them to say we don't need it. But if we had something like this where it's like, hey, you did everything right, and maybe even offer like have like this little seal of approval of like, yes, the state says you do not need it, and you're still one of the good guys who is forthcoming. Well, I don't know exactly the details on that. I just, for one, think it would be very helpful, like in our use case.
And if I might add, I was there present. Good to see you, Matt. And I ran into the exact same thing. And so we created a non-custodial wallet, which doesn't hold anything in custody. It just allows for people to use their seed phrases to interact on the blockchain. And we're sort of like a portal and a window to that, but we're not actually holding any money custodially or any assets custodially. And so we went to go register to advertise, and we were told to register with FinCEN. And that whole process, that's where I did my research and found the FinCEN guidance, and it was basically said, you're exempted. You don't need to register. And so we communicated with him, and that was the response we got back is, you're exempt. You don't need to do this. But everyone we talked to was like, you need to be FinCEN certified because they assume we're an exchange and we're holding money custodially. And so it's a big gap and a big problem for people in our industry. I feel like, two people here at the table who literally ran into the same issue.
Yeah, that's a great point.
We've got a couple questions online. Let's go there, starting with Paul Allred. If you'll unmute yourself.
So I can't sit here and be silent because what Matt's been talking about and Dave's been talking about is something that the Department of Financial Institutions regulates, and we often get referred to as the Division of Finance, but we're the Department of Financial Institutions. And the reason that crypto companies can't get a money transmitter license is because crypto has no legal status in the state of Utah. So it's not money. It's not defined legally as money. And so when someone's looking for a money transmitter license, you don't need a license to engage in crypto exchange. And so you're correct that you're not required to, and so you're exempt. What I hear the complaint is we need an official exemption, but you can't get any more official than you don't need a money transmitter license to exchange crypto between parties. And that's a decision that the legislature needs to make a policy decision whether we're going to treat crypto as money in the state of Utah.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, and Paul, sorry, just to
go ahead, Matt.
Intervene just for a moment there. And I think we're in complete agreement. And I think what we're looking for is there's an obstacle because the rest of the world hasn't caught up to that definition. And we're looking to help provide the good actors with something to start sending to Facebook or sending to Google when they're saying, no, you need a money transmitter act, or you need a money transmission license. And based on whatever the state's money transmission act is to issue a license, therefore allows them to do this in that state or not. And I think if they went in and they said, no, we have an exemption, we're actually filed with the state of Utah. Yes, I work with Facebook a lot. They could cancel you and say, no way, we're still not doing it. I get that. But if you had multiple people doing it, my goal is that they go, oh, this is interesting. Maybe this is something that we need to consider. Now, is Facebook going to allow you to advertise? Probably not. Still, they hate crypto. They don't want to do anything related to crypto and marketing. But again, I think for the good actors, it starts to open a door where the people who are wanting to do this and wanting to do it legit would allow that. I will say one other piece. There was a lot in this FinCEN guidance document that also is missing inside of the Money Transmitter Act. And just so we understand why, it's not an accident. One just happened way before the other. So we had the Money Transmitter Act come out first, and then we had this guidance thing come out after. And so we just need to catch up a little bit. And I am just proposing this as one piece, that we update the Money Transmitter Act. There's a lot of other things that I think our working group can determine if it needs to be added.
Okay.
But yes, Paul, to your comment, I completely agree.
We have a couple comments. Let's go to Ian first.
I was just going to add really quickly, Dave, you're not alone even. Blockchain.com, who is literally, I think, the second or third oldest crypto company in the world, just went through a very similar exercise in Texas where we had checked every box, we'd done everything right, but and Texas has one of the more streamlined MTL application processes in the country, but there's still just kind of so much education and so much apprehension around the entire marketplace, I think, the entire technology. So there's just a lot of base level education that still needs to be done. And Matt, the only thing I was going to add too is that I don't know if everyone got a chance to read the mountain of reports that came out pursuant to the federal executive order about 2 or 3 weeks ago now. But Treasury did kind of and this is on the federal level, obviously, and we all know the feds move at a glacial pace, but they said very plainly that they don't think the MTL regime is a suitable long-term solution for crypto licensing. And this is obviously a big project, but maybe this is something the working group could do, is kind of get together in blue sky just have a blue sky session of what a model alternative to an MTL might look like. And it might look like, at least in part, exactly what you're describing. But Treasury has now said they think that the MTL regime is not a suitable long-term solution officially.
Yeah, I think that's a great consideration we make going into a working group. Yeah. Thank you.
Maybe just one last data point to put out there is in the Lummis-Gillibrand bill that hasn't been proposed yet, but we met with Senator yesterday, and so we think it's forthcoming. She seemed optimistic. There's actually a line in there about money transmissions, and it basically says, all you 50 states, like, we're not going to tell you what to do. Like, you're the states, you have your own laws. That's your jurisdiction, but you all need to come together about whether, for example, non-custodial wallets are or are not in this in the jurisdiction of MTLs. And so just to kind of put that on just as one more thought, is that, like, if we can sort of come out with something now of like how we're going to tackle this, then when we need to essentially start talking with all other 49 states about what we all want to agree on under that federal law, then I think we could lead the charge there.
Any other comments by the committee? Matt, anything else you'd add?
No, thank you. I'll be putting together another work group around this. Thank you.
Great. I will say that as the session is coming soon, it would probably be good to get a bill file opened on this if we are trying to move this forward.
Yes, I think we are. Session. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk and figure out who the right person to open that is. Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda. Let's see here. It's the state crypto wallet. Dave Lemke.
Oh, that's me. So just this is more a idea to throw out there just for us to consider. But in terms of the thoughts of how can we make Utah more crypto friendly and as a place that people want to come and do business, like what are some ways we can signal to the broader market that yes, this is a safe place to do crypto and do it right and invest, protect, make it safe for everyone. So one thought that I just want to throw out there is if we wanted to say create an Ethereum node. It takes about 32 ETH, which right now, at least for the state, is not very much money. Then we could essentially start validating the Ethereum network and essentially have that participation as sort of a badge of honor for our state of like, look, we are contributing actively by contributing to the proof of stake. It's good publicity. It's cheap and easy. It also would set up the state for having all the internal controls in place for how do we manage private keys? How do we even host a wallet? Who do we use? Do we custody it ourselves or not? Then for things like these, digital certificates where we need to have a signature, well, how are we going to sign those actually? We will, if we have our own node and we have successfully, this very, very small little piece, small little asset, all the controls that go around it are going to be critical as we expand our footprint. And there's other things as well, like as we talk about like DAOs becoming their own legal entities, they may or not have bank accounts for a while, and they may or may not, elect to be treated like a corporation and have their own tax liability. In which case, if we had our own Ethereum node, we would be able to accept payments on chain without needing to have a middleman collecting fees and exchanging currencies, et cetera. And so it would sort of streamline the creation of, our DAO framework as well. So that's all. I haven't thought through much more than just the pros of it. So I just wanted to throw it out there.
I think it is important to note, if you're talking specifically an Ethereum node, we have almost 30,000 marriage licenses registered on Ethereum. So right now, that's what we're using is Ethereum, and we have almost 30,000 from starting in 2019 through today. So if we were going to start somewhere, that would be a good place to start, considering that that's where we've been registering these marriage licenses. And during COVID, during the first several months of the pandemic, Utah County was the only county issuing marriage licenses in the state. So all marriage licenses for the entire state through the first part of COVID were issued through Utah County on Ethereum.
Other comments, questions? Don't see anything. So as far as kind of moving forward, are you looking at putting together a working group?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a lot of silence, which it doesn't always mean everyone agrees with the idea, or maybe.
I agree with it.
I mean, are there any? I would love to just hear someone say like, "That's a terrible idea," or
It's a good idea. I think it's a good idea, and
Like a straw poll right now, I think we'd all say yes. Not all, but a lot of us.
No, I mean, you nailed it. I mean, if you chose some other chain, I'd be like, but Ethereum's like the almost de facto standard. And I mean, there's other chains that I would be queasy about. Like if you chose Binance, it'd be like, it's really expensive too, like millions of dollars to become like one of the 21 validators. And there's also like Harmony One and Avalanche and Polygon, but Ethereum's probably the easiest. And I think would get some good PR from that.
So the biggest hurdle in my mind to doing this is that my understanding, like with like the accepting crypto to pay taxes, like I think it was said that the state is not allowed to custody crypto right now, and so therefore this couldn't work unless we change that rule, because you have to hold 32 ETH at least to be able to do a node. And so I guess is that maybe where we start, is by essentially creating a change in the law, because if we can't custody crypto, then this is dead
We
on
can
arrival.
segregate it too, though.
But-
We're not custodying it in the treasury.
But is there really a law that restricts that, or that's just the practice? Like we have a policy that we're not doing it?
I don't know.
That would be a Marlo question.
Yeah,
Chair,
go ahead.
I think he's referring to the payments acceptance bill, and the payments acceptance bill requires it to be turned into dollars, but the payments acceptance bill doesn't restrict any other activity that the state might
Right,
engage in.
I think it's only for accepting it. It's the unacceptable risk in accepting it as tender, as currency. But legally, I don't think there's anything that actually prevents us from holding it. It's just that it's the unacceptable risk in accepting it for currency. And if we're not accepting it as currency, I don't think there's anything preventing us. And as many people know, and as I tend to interpret state laws as a government official, if I'm not explicitly prohibited from doing something, then I usually do.
I doubt there's anything in the code that explicitly says that
I
the
agree.
state can't hold any cryptocurrency.
I think it goes back to the Constitution. It's in the 1896 document of the Constitution
We-
about cryptocurrency, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, the state owns lots of different types of property. This would just be another type of property.
Well,
And we have defined digital property rights, so we've already done that.
That's true.
Hey, Marlo.
Yeah.
Sorry, real quick. Is it in the Money Management Act maybe that they're referencing, or what? I'm trying to think of where
No.
it would be defined.
No, I think it was just the acceptance of payment to the state in crypto, that we do not want to take the risk of holding crypto until it's turned into dollars. So we don't take ownership of crypto. This is a different question, I think, the holding of cryptocurrency for a different purpose.
Yeah, and I would even go further. I think that bill, it tasked the Division of Finance to come up with a method where they would employ a third party to accept crypto and transmit it into dollars. But even then, I don't think there's anything in the bill that would say the state can't accept crypto. It just says the Division of Finance has to provide an option for them to work with a third party that would accept crypto and then give it to dollars.
Commissioner, you just substantially raised Aaron's suspicion of government, though.
Go ahead, Trace.
Oh, and Chair, I think the Digital Asset Management Act from the last session provided the framework to recognize crypto as an asset. And then as an asset, the treasurer would then be able to have property rights in allocating state funds into it. So I think we have both the pieces of the legislation there.
It's something we can look in maybe further, if you don't mind, kind of just seeing if there's anything else in the code that would prevent something like that. But I think taking that act, the question is, would you need a piece of legislation to do that? Or is that something that the executive could just decide that they want to invest in, or one of the
You
departments?
just need the appropriation, right? If the executive wanted to use part of their budget to do it, but I think it's just basically the appropriation. You wouldn't have to have a law to do it. Marlo could probably do it for us. He's got a budget. Hey, I'm literally now thinking, I'm in the process of building my 2021 budget, and I've got an innovation fund. And I'm in my mind thinking, I wonder if I could do that in the county with my innovation fund.
Well, maybe it's worth then putting together a couple people and coming back with a recommendation to the committee.
Yeah, I guess I'll just shoot an email, and whoever wants to volunteer to help me out with this, then we'll chat.
All right, stick me on your list.
Okay. All right, that's the bulk of our list of discussion items. I know there's been some work done on the DAO. So maybe Rob, if you could give us a quick update. We've got, a minute or so left.
It'll only take a minute. We had a great working group the other day. Thank you for all those that jumped in and joined. I understand that some jumped in and couldn't join, and I didn't realize that till today. And I don't know what happened there, but we had a really good group, a good, robust discussion. Scott Elder and I are working through 4 or 5 issues that were raised in that group discussion. And I think we're going to do another group discussion within the next couple of weeks. I'll send out the notice, and we'll have a certain level of accountability on some of those issues, bring them up, roundtable them again. And then by this meeting in a month, we'll be able to report on those, and would like to be on the agenda to give a status of where we're at with the proposed legislation. The short of it is that we're moving forward boldly, but we do need to resolve some practical issues around external jurisdictions recognizing us as a DAO, whether that be banks, whether that be the federal government in processing EIN numbers and that sort of thing. Those are some of the strategic legislative things we need to do to, I think, achieve what we're ultimately trying to achieve with our bold move on the legislation.
Great. Thanks, Rob. All right. Any other items that need to come before the committee before we adjourn? All right. I'll just let everyone know that our next scheduled meeting is November 14th. I think, if I remember right, is it before that time we are going to present before the Business and Labor Committee?
So, yeah. Or is it that week?
Or is it that way? Let me just look at the calendar really quick. I remember if we. I think it is that week. So on the 16th. So we will have another meeting before that, which I think will be good. But if people want to put that on their radar, if you want to attend, we will have a presentation in front of the interim Business and Labor Committee on the 16th. And I think we'll be preparing a written report to the Executive Management Committee for them to review that same time. All right, so with that, I'll take a final motion.
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor say aye.